My uncle claimed me as his future wife 6 hours after I was born, and every Sunday he trained me to serve his favorite sake at the perfect temperature. When my 12-year-old cousin Emmy was found in a dog crate after 6 weeks of extended training, the FBI discovered our family's 5th-century registry of girls claimed by their uncles how to be a good wife by age 13. You see, in my family, male relatives got to claim female cousins as future wives the day we were born. We called it securing the bloodline, and I genuinely thought every family did this until I was 11 and mentioned my Uncle Kenji was my future husband to a classmate. Her face went white. "That's illegal," she whispered, "and gross." I laughed because I thought she was joking. She wasn't. The rules were simple. Any girl born into the family belonged to whichever uncle claimed her first. My Uncle Kenji claimed me 6 hours after birth. My cousin Ayumi belonged to her uncle Toshiro since she was 2 days old. My sister Yuki was promised to Uncle Hiroshi before Mom even left the hospital. The men would celebrate each claiming with expensive cigars and aged whiskey, toasting to another successful investment. When you turned 13, the grooming visits started. Uncle Kenji would pick me up every Sunday for training. I learned which sake he preferred, how many degrees cold, the exact serving angle, how to massage his shoulders after work, which perfume made him happy. If I messed up, I'd have to stand in the corner holding heavy books until my arms shook. "How will you be a good wife if you can't even remember simple things?" he'd ask. Sometimes he'd make me practice walking in the wedding shoes he'd already bought, size 6. I was still a size 4. Ayumi turned 16 first. I watched her commitment ceremony. That's when the claiming became official, and you moved into your uncle's house. She wore white lace while Uncle Toshiro, 53 with 2 dead wives already, slipped his original claiming ring from her baby years onto her adult finger. She threw up twice during the vows. They said it was nerves, normal bride stuff. Her parents sat in the front row, counting the cash envelope they'd received for raising her well. 2 months later, Ayumi was in the hospital with kidney problems. 3 months after that, she was dead. They said she was too weak for childbearing. Uncle Toshiro was already browsing the family registry for his next claim by the funeral. I heard him tell my father he preferred younger ones next time. "They last longer," he said. But my little cousin Emmy was different. She had what the family called outside exposure. Her mom had accidentally enrolled her in public school instead of our family's homeschool network. At age 10, she'd ask things like, "Why can't I pick my own husband?" And "What if I don't want to marry anyone?" She'd sneak library books about women's rights into family gatherings, hiding them under her traditional dress. Emmy got pulled from school after that. They started her grooming visits early to fix her thinking. Uncle Akira took her to his cabin every weekend for intensive training. When she came back, she had bruises she wasn't allowed to talk about. Once, she tried to show me finger-shaped marks on her arms. Her mother slapped her and said good wives don't complain. Everything changed when I was 15, and Emmy, now 12, didn't come back from a weekend visit. Uncle Akira said she was being difficult and needed extended training. 2 weeks passed, then 3, then a month. Here's the sick part. We were living in suburban Michigan the whole time. Normal suburb, normal families all around us. My parents told us other families just didn't understand the importance of keeping wealth in the bloodline. They let their daughters marry strangers who dilute everything, my mother would say. Americans are too soft. They've forgotten the old ways that keep families strong. Emmy had been gone 6 weeks when her public school teacher, Ms. Tanaka, showed up at our door. She'd been trying to check on her former student. My parents smiled sweetly. "Oh, Emmy's visiting relatives out of state," they lied. But Ms. Tanaka had already called the police about a missing child. When they found Emmy locked in Uncle Akira's cabin basement, she weighed 68 pounds. She'd been kept in a dog crate for refusing to accept her future. The police said she had infected wounds from trying to claw her way out. Her fingernails were gone. She'd lost them scratching at the metal bars. Within 3 hours, FBI agents were seizing our family registry. 5 centuries of claiming records. Photos of commitment ceremonies with girls in white dresses and uncles old enough to be grandfathers. Death certificates of wives who never made it past 25. 17 family members got arrested that day. My Uncle Kenji tried to grab me as they cuffed him, screaming that I belonged to him, that he had the papers to prove it. We thought it was over. The girls were safe. The uncles were in custody. I was wrong, because 3 weeks later, I got a call from the prosecutor. "The judge just threw out all the charges," she said, her voice shaking. "Insufficient evidence. They're being released tomorrow." Then I noticed it. The small scar on her wrist. The same marking all the claimed wives had after their ceremonies. Full story on channel. Link below. I hung up the phone, my hands trembling. Released tomorrow. All 17 of them, including Uncle Kenji, who still believed I belonged to him. Mom walked into the kitchen, her face calm as always. She poured herself tea and sat across from me at the table. Her movements were precise, controlled, the way she'd taught me to move since I could walk. She noticed my shaking hands and frowned. I told her about the prosecutor's call. Her expression didn't change. She sipped her tea, set the cup down with a soft clink, and folded her hands in her lap. Then she stood, walked to the window, and pulled the curtains aside to look at the street. The doorbell rang an hour later. Uncle Kenji stood on our porch, still wearing the same clothes from his arrest 3 weeks ago. His eyes found mine immediately through the screen door. He smiled, that same smile from every Sunday training session. Mom opened the door wide and bowed. I backed away, but she grabbed my wrist and pulled me forward. Uncle Kenji stepped inside, removed his shoes, and placed them neatly by the door. He walked to the living room like he'd never been gone. My father appeared from his study, embraced his brother, and they sat together on the couch. Mom served them tea while I stood frozen in the doorway. Uncle Kenji patted the spot beside him, the same spot where I'd practiced sitting properly for years. I ran upstairs instead. My bedroom door didn't have a lock, something I'd never questioned before. I pushed my dresser against it and sat on my bed, listening to the voices downstairs. Laughter, casual conversation, like nothing had happened. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. It was Emmy, messaging from the hospital. She wanted to know if I was safe. I told her about Uncle Kenji's return. She typed for a long time, then stopped, started again. Finally sent, "Get out, now." But where could I go? This was my family, my world. Everything outside had been described as dangerous, corrupting, inferior to our ways. I'd been trained since birth to fear the outside as much as I'd been trained to serve sake at the perfect temperature. A knock at my door, soft, patient. Uncle Kenji's voice came through, gentle as always during our training sessions. He reminded me about the wedding shoes, how they were waiting in his car, how we had so much catching up to do. The dresser scraped against the floor as he tested the door. I climbed out my window onto the roof, the same route Ayumi had shown me years ago when we'd sneak out to look at stars. She'd told me then about her plans to run away before her ceremony. 2 weeks later, later, she was in the hospital. 3 months later, dead. The neighbor's porch light turned on. Mrs. Chen stepped outside with her recycling bin, saw me on the roof, and stopped. We stared at each other. She'd lived next door for 10 years, had probably heard things through the walls. She set down her bin and went back inside without a word. I climbed down and ran. No shoes, no coat, just my phone and the clothes I was wearing. The street was empty, suburban, and quiet. Normal houses with normal families inside, watching TV or making dinner. None of them knew what happened in ours. 3 blocks away, I called Ms. Tanaka. She answered immediately, like she'd been waiting. She gave me an address and told me to hurry. I ran faster, my socks soaking through from the wet pavement. The address led to a small apartment building. Ms. Tanaka met me at the entrance, wrapped a blanket around my shoulders, and led me inside. Her apartment was tiny, filled with books and papers. On her coffee table sat a thick folder labeled with our family name. She'd been investigating us for years, she explained. Ever since her first claimed wife student 20 years ago. She showed me photos, documents, death certificates, patterns spanning decades, girls who died young from accidents or illness, girls who disappeared and were never reported missing. My phone rang constantly. Mom, Dad, Uncle Kenji, other relatives. I turned it off. Ms. Tanaka made me tea and sat beside me on her worn couch. She had the same scar on her wrist that the prosecutor had, the claiming mark. She'd escaped her own family 30 years ago, she told me. Changed her name, built a new life, became a teacher to watch for girls like us. She'd saved 12 over the years. Emmy was number 13. I could be 14 if I wanted. But leaving meant losing everything. My parents, my siblings, my cousins who were still trapped. It meant admitting that my entire life had been built on something monstrous. It meant accepting that love in my family came with a price tag and an expiration date. Ms. Tanaka let me sleep on her couch that night. I dreamed of Ayumi in her white dress, throwing up at her ceremony while our family clapped. Of Emmy in a dog crate, scratching until her fingers bled. Of Uncle Kenji's patient smile as he waited for me to make mistakes during training. Well, nothing says normal suburban Michigan family quite like having a centuries-old bride registry where uncles call dibs on newborn nieces like they're reserving tables at a restaurant. I woke to pounding on the door. Ms. Tanaka was already dressed, standing by the window. Through the peephole, I saw my father and 3 uncles in the hallway. They knew where I was. Of course they did. We'd been taught that the family knew everything, saw everything, owned everything. Ms. Tanaka grabbed her folder and my hand. We slipped out the back entrance and into her car. As we drove away, I saw Uncle Kenji's car parked across the street. He was sitting inside, watching, those wedding shoes probably still in his trunk. Ms. Tanaka drove through back streets, checking her mirrors constantly. I sat hunched in the passenger seat, watching familiar neighborhoods blur past. She pulled into a parking garage downtown, and we switched to a different car she had waiting there. Her hands moved efficiently, transferring boxes of documents between vehicles. We drove for 2 hours to a small town I'd never heard of. Ms. Tanaka had arranged a safe house through her network of former students. The house belonged to a woman named Sarah, another escapee from a similar family. Sarah opened the door before we knocked, ushered us inside quickly, and drew all the curtains. Sarah showed me to a small bedroom upstairs. Clean sheets, a lock on the door, clothes in my size already laid out. Ms. Tanaka had been preparing for this. I changed out of my pajamas and sat on the bed, finally processing what I'd done. I'd broken the most fundamental rule of our family. I'd refused my uncle's claim. Downstairs, Ms. Tanaka and Sarah spread documents across the dining table. Birth certificates, claiming records, death certificates. Sarah pointed to patterns in the dates. Girls who died young always had their deaths recorded exactly 3 years after their commitment ceremonies. Ms. Tanaka had highlighted financial transfers that happened after each death. Insurance policies, inheritance distributions, property transfers. The uncles weren't just claiming wives, they were farming assets. My phone, still off, sat heavy in my pocket. I knew there would be hundreds of messages by now. Threats disguised as concern, guilt wrapped in love, commands hidden in pleas. I'd seen it happen when cousin Mika tried to refuse her claiming 5 years ago. The family had worn her down with coordinated pressure until she apologized and submitted. She lasted 18 months after her ceremony. Ms. Tanaka knocked and entered with a laptop. She showed me secure message boards where other escaped girls shared information, anonymous posts about which family members to avoid, which relatives might help, how to spot someone who'd been sent to retrieve you. I recognized some of the stories. Girls I'd grown up with who'd supposedly moved away for college or marriage. They'd been hiding this whole time. I spent hours reading their experiences, the attempted retrievals, the family members who'd pretended to help only to deliver them back, the careful planning required to save younger sisters and cousins. Some had succeeded, many had failed. All carried guilt about the ones they'd left behind. Sarah made dinner while Ms. Tanaka worked on documents. She was building a case file, she explained, though not for legal purposes. The law had already failed us. This was for protection, leverage, evidence to use if the family escalated. She'd learned over the years that documentation was power, even if the courts wouldn't listen. That night, I turned on my phone briefly to check for messages from Emmy. Between the hundreds of family messages, I found one from her hospital room. She was being discharged tomorrow. Her parents were taking her home. She was scared. I wrote back quickly, telling her about Ms. Tanaka's safe house network, giving her the emergency number. Then I turned the phone off again. Ms. Tanaka woke me before dawn. We needed to move. Sarah had spotted a familiar car circling the neighborhood. The family had found us already. We packed quickly, taking only essentials and the document boxes. Sarah would stay behind to misdirect anyone who came asking. We drove to another safe house 3 towns over. This one belonged to Maria, who'd escaped her family 15 years ago. She ran a small bed and breakfast now, providing cover for girls who needed temporary shelter. Maria took one look at me and set up a room in the back, away from windows. Ms. Tanaka left to check on Emmy at the hospital. I spent the day helping Maria with cleaning, trying to keep my hands busy while my mind raced. Every car that passed made me tense. Every phone ring made me jump. Maria noticed and taught me breathing exercises she'd learned in therapy. Recovery was a long process, she said. Freedom was just the first step. Ms. Tanaka returned that evening with bad news. Emmy was gone. Her parents had checked her out early, and the hospital couldn't say where they'd taken her. The emergency number I'd given her hadn't been called. We both knew what this meant. They were accelerating her training to prevent another escape attempt. I wanted to go back for her immediately. Ms. Tanaka stopped me, explaining what I already knew deep down. Walking back into the family now would only result in 2 trapped girls instead of 1. We needed a plan, resources, leverage. Emotional rescue attempts were how girls got recaptured. Maria joined our planning session. She'd successfully extracted her younger sister 8 years ago. It had taken months of preparation, creating the right circumstances, waiting for the perfect moment. Patience was crucial. Mistakes meant losing any chance to help. We spent the next days establishing routines. I helped Maria with the bed and breakfast, learning to cook for guests, clean rooms, manage bookings. Normal skills I'd never been taught. Ms. Tanaka came and went, checking other safe houses, monitoring family movements, gathering intelligence through her network. A week into hiding, Maria's security camera alerted us to visitors. 2 men in suits, walking up the driveway with the confident stride of family enforcers. Not uncles themselves, but cousins or nephews sent to retrieve property. Maria calmly directed me to the hidden room behind the pantry while she answered the door. I crouched in the dark space, listening to muffled voices. Maria played the confused innkeeper perfectly, offering to check her guest registry, asking for photos of their missing relative. The men grew frustrated but remained polite. They'd be back, we all knew. This was just the first probe. After they left, we implemented new security measures, different exit routes, coded messages, a rotation schedule between safe houses. I couldn't stay in one place too long. The family had resources, connections, patience. They'd spent centuries perfecting their system. Ms. Tanaka brought news about other girls. My sister Yuki had started showing signs of resistance, asking questions during her training sessions. My cousin Hana had been caught with a hidden phone. Small rebellions that gave us hope, but also urgency. The family would tighten control in response to my escape. 2 weeks in, I made a mistake. I turned on my phone to check for any word from Emmy, and saw a message from my cousin Reiko. She'd always been kind to me, sneaking me extra food when Uncle Kenji's punishments included fasting. Her message was simple. She wanted to help. She had information about Emmy. Could we meet? I showed Ms. Tanaka the message. She studied it carefully, cross-referencing Reiko's name in her files. No red flags, no history of betrayal, but also no history of resistance. Neutral family members were the most dangerous, she explained. They could go either way. We decided to risk it. Not a meeting, but a phone call from a burner phone. Ms. Tanaka would monitor, ready to cut the connection if needed. I dialed Reiko's number with shaking hands. Reiko answered on the first ring. Her voice was strained, nervous. She spoke quickly, telling me Emmy was being held at Uncle Akira's main house, not the cabin. The family was planning to move up her commitment ceremony to next month before she turned 13. They wanted to prevent another escape attempt. I asked Reiko why she was helping. She paused, then admitted she'd been claimed by Uncle Hiroshi's son last year. The same uncle who'd claimed my sister. She'd seen what happened to the wives. She didn't want that for Emmy or any of us, but she couldn't leave, not with her younger sister still at home. Ms. Tanaka cut the call after 3 minutes. Too long, and it could be traced. We had information now, but also a ticking clock. 1 month to figure out how to extract Emmy before her ceremony. After that, she'd be moved to her uncle's house, and access would become nearly impossible. Maria suggested reaching out to her network. Other safe houses might have resources, people positioned to help. Ms. Tanaka agreed, but warned about expanding the circle of trust. Every new person involved increased the risk of exposure. I spent sleepless nights thinking about Emmy, 12 years old, facing what I'd narrowly escaped. The guilt ate at me. If I hadn't run, maybe I could have protected her somehow. But I knew that was the family's conditioning talking. Individual sacrifice didn't save anyone. It just created more victims. Ms. Tanaka introduced me to Dr. Kim, a therapist who specialized in cult survivors. I bristled at the word cult, but Dr. Kim explained gently, that's what our family structure was. Isolated beliefs, control mechanisms, punishment for questioning, financial exploitation. Recognizing it was part of breaking free. Our sessions were difficult. Dr. Kim helped me identify the deep programming I'd internalized. The automatic guilt when I thought about my uncles, the fear of the outside world, the belief that I was betraying my culture by refusing my role. These thoughts weren't mine, she explained. They'd been installed through years of training. 3 weeks into hiding, Uncle Kenji found one of the safe houses. How did Ms. Tanaka know to have a second car waiting in that parking garage? The way she moved those document boxes so quickly makes me wonder how many times she's done this before with other girls trying to escape their families. Not the one I was in, thankfully, but one Mizzy Tanaka used for document storage. He'd broken in while it was empty, taken photos of everything. Now he knew about the network, the other girls who'd escaped, the extent of Mizzy Tanaka's operation. We had to assume all locations were compromised. Maria moved me to a new place, a cabin owned by her friend who wasn't part of the network. Off the grid, no paper trail. Mizzy Tanaka went dark, communicating only through encrypted channels. The isolation was hard. No internet, no phone, no contact with the outside world. Just me and the forest, and the constant fear that every snapping twig was someone coming to claim me. I wrote in journals Ms. Tanaka had provided, documenting my memories while they were fresh. Evidence, she'd said, for ourselves, if no one else. A week before Emmy's ceremony, Reiko sent another message through a complex chain of contacts. The family was fracturing. My escape had triggered something. Other girls were asking questions. Some parents were having doubts. Not enough to stop the system, but enough to create cracks. Ms. Tanaka saw an opportunity. If we could extract Emmy successfully, it might inspire others. But it had to be clean, careful, without violence or legal involvement. We needed Emmy to walk out on her own, publicly, in a way the family couldn't deny or reverse. The plan came together slowly. Reiko would ensure Emmy had access to a phone. Ms. Tanaka would arrange for a school counselor to be present at a public location. I would make contact and convince Emmy to ask for help in front of witnesses. Simple in concept, nearly impossible in execution. We had one shot. The day before her ceremony, Emmy would be taken to the courthouse to sign preliminary documents. Public space, multiple exits, potential witnesses. Reiko would create a distraction. Ms. Tanaka would be positioned as backup. I would approach Emmy directly. The night before, I couldn't sleep. Everything could go wrong. It was probably a trap. Even if it wasn't, Emmy might be too scared or too conditioned to accept help, but we had to try. Leaving her there wasn't an option. Ms. Tanaka drove me to town before dawn. We parked blocks away from the courthouse. I wore a wig, sunglasses, clothes that made me look older. Ms. Tanaka took position near the back entrance. We had burner phones, coded signals, abort protocols. I waited across from the courthouse entrance, pretending to read a newspaper. My hands shook so badly I could barely hold it. Every minute felt like an hour. Then I saw them. Uncle Akira's car pulling up. Him getting out first, then reaching back to help someone. Emmy emerged, wearing a white dress that made her look even younger than 12. Her hair was styled formally, her face pale under carefully applied makeup. She moved mechanically, her uncle's hand firm on her shoulder. Behind them, her parents followed, her mother carrying a folder of documents. They climbed the courthouse steps. I forced myself to wait, to stick to the plan. Reiko should create the distraction any moment, but nothing happened. They reached the door, went inside. My window was closing. I made a decision. Plan or no plan, I couldn't let her disappear into that building. I dropped the newspaper and ran across the street, taking the steps 2 at a time. Through the glass doors, I saw them at the security checkpoint. Security stopped me, asking for ID. I fumbled with my fake documents, buying time, searching for Emmy in the crowd. There, by the elevators, the doors were opening. In seconds, she'd be gone. I called her name, not loud enough to cause a scene, but sharp enough to cut through the courthouse murmur. She turned, and for a moment, I saw recognition flash across her face before the careful blankness returned. Uncle Akira's hand tightened on her shoulder. He steered her toward the elevator, but Emmy's feet dragged. She was resisting, subtly, but definitely. The elevator doors started to close. Then Reiko appeared, running from the other direction, calling for Uncle Akira. Family emergency, she said breathlessly. Uncle Hiroshi needed him immediately. Something about property documents. Uncle Akira hesitated, caught between his claim and family obligation. The security guard was still checking my ID. I watched Emmy's parents debate in hushed tones. The elevator doors closed without them. Uncle Akira stepped away to take a phone call, leaving Emmy with her mother. This was it. I walked past security, straight to Emmy. Her mother saw me coming and grabbed Emmy's wrist, but I reached them first, kneeling to Emmy's eye level, speaking quickly. Ms. Tanaka was outside. Safety was possible. She just had to say she wanted help. Emmy's mother tried to pull her away, but we'd drawn attention now. A courthouse security officer approached, asking if everything was all right. And in that moment, with witnesses watching, Emmy spoke. She wanted to go to school, she said. Real school. She didn't want to get married. She was only 12. The words came out in a rush, like a dam breaking. Her mother's grip loosened in shock. The security officer's expression shifted from routine concern to alarm. Uncle Akira returned, saw the scene, and moved toward us. But more people were watching now. A lawyer paused to observe. A court clerk stepped out from behind her desk. Emmy kept talking, her voice growing stronger. She wanted to be a teacher like Ms. Tanaka. She wanted to choose her own life. I stood and took Emmy's hand. Together we walked toward the exit. Uncle Akira called after us, his voice shifting from commanding to pleading. Her parents followed, her mother crying now. But Emmy didn't look back. She held my hand tighter and kept walking. Ms. Tanaka was waiting outside with the car running. We got in quickly, Emmy in the middle, me blocking the door. As we pulled away, I saw Uncle Akira on the courthouse steps, his phone pressed to his ear, already coordinating the family's response. We drove to a new safe house, one even Maria didn't know about. Emmy sat silent for the first hour, then began to cry. Not the careful, quiet tears we'd been taught, but deep, shaking sobs. Ms. Tanaka and I held her while she let out years of fear and pain. That night, Emmy told us everything. The escalated training after her first escape attempt, the punishments designed to break her will, the constant reminders that she belonged to Uncle Akira, that resistance was selfishness, that good girls accepted their fate. But she also told us about the other girls. My sister Yuki, who'd started a secret journal. Our cousin Hana, who'd found Ms. Tanaka's old website. Others who were questioning, doubting, planning. My escape had shown them it was possible. Emmy's public refusal would show them even more. Ms. Tanaka worked through the night, activating legal protections for Emmy through her school district contacts. Not criminal charges. We'd learned that route was useless. But educational advocacy, counseling requirements, supervised visitation orders, bureaucratic shields that would buy time. The family's response came within days. Not through legal channels or violent retrieval attempts, but through something more insidious. They began spreading stories about Ms. Tanaka. Accusations of grooming, kidnapping, corrupting young girls. They had resources, connections, generations of practice at controlling narratives. Some people believed them. Ms. Tanaka lost her teaching position pending investigation. 2 safe houses were reported to authorities as suspicious locations. The network that had saved dozens of girls over decades began to fracture under pressure. But something else happened too. The girls still trapped began reaching out, secretly, carefully, through hidden phones and coded messages. They wanted to know how. They wanted to know when. They wanted to know if we could help them too. I looked at Emmy, safe but haunted, free but far from healed. I thought about my sister, my cousins, all the girls still counting days until their ceremonies. The family thought they'd won by silencing Ms. Tanaka. They didn't understand they'd created something bigger. We couldn't save everyone. Maybe we couldn't even save most of them, but we could try. One girl at a time, one careful extraction after another, building a new network from the ashes of the old one. It would take years, maybe decades, but we had something the family didn't expect us to have. We had each other, and we had hope. The next morning brought a development none of us expected. Ms. Tanaka received a message through one of her old contacts. My mother wanted to meet, not with the family present, not at our house, but alone at a public cafe downtown. Ms. Tanaka immediately suspected a trap, but I recognized something in the message's wording. My mother had used a phrase she'd taught me years ago, one that meant she was acting without my father's knowledge. We debated for hours. Maria argued against any contact with family members. Ms. Tanaka worried about surveillance, about being followed back to our safe house, but I kept thinking about my sister Yuki, still trapped at home, still facing her own ceremony in 2 years. If my mother was genuinely reaching out, it could mean access to information we desperately needed. Ms. Tanaka arranged the meeting with multiple precautions, a public location with several exits, spotters positioned nearby, a predetermined signal if things went wrong. I watched from across the street as my mother entered the cafe, her usual confident stride replaced by something more hesitant. She sat alone at a corner table checking her phone repeatedly. Ms. Tanaka entered 10 minutes later, taking a seat across from her. Through the window, I watched their interaction unfold. My mother's hands trembled as she pushed an envelope across the table. Ms. Tanaka examined its contents carefully, her expression growing more serious with each document she reviewed. The meeting lasted 20 minutes. Ms. Tanaka's chess game just went from defense to offense, and the family didn't see that counter move coming at all. 20 minutes to possibly flip someone from the inside? That envelope better contain more than grocery coupons. When Ms. Tanaka emerged, she walked in the opposite direction from our car, following our planned route to ensure she wasn't being followed. I met her 3 blocks away at our designated pickup point. Her face was grim as we drove to yet another safe house, this one an hour outside the city. Inside the envelope were documents my mother had been secretly collecting for months. Bank statements showing the financial transfers after each wife's death, medical records that contradicted official causes of death. Most importantly, a list of girls currently in the system, their ages, their assigned uncles, and their ceremony dates. My sister Yuki was scheduled for her grooming visits to begin in 6 months. My cousin Hana's ceremony was set for next spring. There were 12 girls total, ranging from infants to teenagers, all trapped in the same system Emmy and I had escaped. My mother's note was brief. She couldn't leave, not with Yuki still at home, but she could no longer watch girls die. Ms. Tanaka spent the night analyzing the documents, cross-referencing them with her existing files. The financial patterns were even clearer now. Each uncle received substantial payouts after their wives' deaths, money that funded the next claiming ceremony. It was a self-perpetuating cycle of exploitation that had enriched the family for generations. Emmy had been quiet since the courthouse, processing her escape in her own way, but seeing the list of girls still trapped sparked something in her. She began writing letters, addressing them to each girl on the list. Not to mail, she explained, but to document what they were facing, what the family wouldn't tell them. Evidence for later, when they were ready to understand. 3 days after my mother's meeting, we received word through the network. Uncle Kenji had been seen at my old high school, asking questions about my friends, my teachers, anyone who might know where I was. The school had protocols for such situations, but his persistence was concerning. He was expanding his search beyond family channels. Ms. Tanaka decided we needed to be more proactive. Waiting for the next crisis meant another girl might not survive her ceremony. Using my mother's information, she began reaching out to specific contacts, teachers at the girls' schools, counselors who might notice warning signs, neighbors who'd witnessed concerning behavior. Not enough to trigger investigations, but enough to create a network of watchful eyes. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Reiko sent another message, this time with news about Uncle Hiroshi. My sister's assigned uncle had suffered a stroke, leaving him partially paralyzed. The family was in chaos, debating whether his claim on Yuki was still valid, or if she should be reassigned to another uncle. The uncertainty had created a window of opportunity. I wanted to extract Yuki immediately, but Ms. Tanaka counseled patience. A rushed attempt would alert the family and close any future opportunities. Instead, she worked with my mother to ensure Yuki had access to a phone, to information about the outside world, to the knowledge that escape was possible, seeds that would grow when the time was right. Meanwhile, the family's campaign against Ms. Tanaka intensified. They hired a private investigator to track down the safe houses. They filed complaints with school boards, child protective services, anyone who would listen to their story of a teacher corrupting young girls. Some authorities dismissed their claims, but others took them seriously enough to investigate. We had to move more frequently, sometimes staying only a few days in each location. The network of safe houses was straining under the pressure. Some supporters backed away, frightened by the family's resources and determination. Others stood firm, but the constant vigilance was exhausting everyone involved. 1 month after Emmy's escape, we received devastating news. My cousin Mika, who'd been forced back into the family 5 years ago, had died. Official cause was complications during pregnancy, but we knew better. She was the fourth wife to die within 3 years of her ceremony, following the pattern my mother's documents had revealed. Her uncle was already in discussions about his next claim. The news hit Emmy particularly hard. She'd looked up to Mika, had seen her as proof that resistance was possible. Now she was gone, another casualty of the system we were fighting. That night, Emmy made a decision. She would testify, not in court where the family's lawyers could tear her apart, but in a deposition that could be used to protect other girls. Ms. Tanaka arranged for a sympathetic lawyer to take Emmy's statement. For 3 hours, Emmy detailed everything. The grooming process, the isolation techniques, the punishments for resistance, the psychological manipulation that made girls believe they deserved their fate. The lawyer, herself a survivor of a different kind of abuse, documented every word with professional precision. While Emmy gave her deposition, I worked with Maria on expanding the safe house network. We needed more locations, more resources, more people willing to shelter girls who'd lost everything. Maria reached out to her contacts in other states, explaining our situation without revealing specific details. Slowly, a broader network began to form. My phone, which I'd kept off for weeks, finally died completely. I felt relieved. The constant temptation to check for messages from family, to see what new pressure they were applying, was gone. Ms. Tanaka provided me with a new phone, a clean number known only to our network. It felt like cutting an invisible chain. 2 months after my escape, Uncle Kenji made his boldest move yet. He showed up at Maria's bed and breakfast, not with enforcers or family members, but alone. He sat in the lobby for hours, telling anyone who would listen about his runaway niece, who'd been brainwashed by radicals. Maria handled him expertly, playing the concerned innkeeper while secretly alerting the network. I watched the security footage later, studying his behavior. He looked older, more desperate. The confident uncle who'd trained me every Sunday was gone, replaced by a man who couldn't accept that his property had walked away. He left only when Maria threatened to call the police, but we knew he'd be back. The family was fracturing in other ways too. My mother reported that arguments had broken out over the claiming system. Some younger family members, influenced by the outside world, were questioning the tradition. Others doubled down, insisting that our escapes proved the need for stricter control. The unity that had protected their system for generations was cracking. 3 months after my escape, we achieved our first coordinated extraction. My cousin Hana, whose ceremony was approaching, had been in contact with Ms. Tanaka through the phone my mother had provided. Unlike my desperate flight or Emmy's public refusal, this was carefully planned. Hana simply didn't come home from school one day, instead meeting Ms. Tanaka at a prearranged location and disappearing into the network. The family's response was swift but disorganized. Without unity, their search efforts overlapped and conflicted. Uncle Kenji insisted I'd orchestrated the escape, while Hana's assigned uncle blamed my mother for providing access to outside information. The infighting gave Hana time to establish herself in a safe house 2 states away. Ms. Tanaka used the chaos to activate more extraction plans. Over the next month, 2 more girls made their escapes. One simply walked out during a family gathering, taking advantage of the adults' distraction during an argument about the claiming system. Another used her grooming visit as an opportunity, asking for help from a store clerk while her uncle was distracted. Each escape further destabilized the family structure. Trust eroded between members. Mothers began watching their daughters more carefully, but some were protecting them from uncles rather than preparing them for ceremonies. The system that had operated smoothly for generations was grinding to a halt. 4 months after my escape, I received unexpected news. The prosecutor who'd called me about the charges being dropped had been quietly building a new case. Using Emmy's deposition and the documents my mother had provided, she was pursuing financial fraud charges rather than abuse. The money trail was harder for expensive lawyers to dismiss. We didn't celebrate. Legal victories were rare in these situations, and we'd learned learned not to hope too heavily. But it was pressure, another crack in the foundation. Some family members began moving assets, preparing for potential legal troubles. Others started distancing themselves from the more aggressive uncles. My sister Yuki finally made contact. Using the phone my mother had hidden for her, she reached out to Ms. Tanaka directly. She was scared, but determined. Uncle Hiroshi's stroke had bought her time, but the family was pressuring her to accept a new claiming. She wanted out before they could reassign her. Extracting Yuki required delicate planning. She was being watched more carefully after the other escapes. My mother could only do so much without raising suspicion. We needed a public opportunity. Witnesses. A moment when the family couldn't simply drag her back home. The opportunity came through school. Yuki's class was taking a field trip to a museum in the city. Multiple chaperones, public spaces, security cameras everywhere. Ms. Tanaka positioned herself at the museum while I waited in a car several blocks away. The plan was simple. During the chaos of loading students back onto buses, Yuki would slip away to a predetermined meeting point. Everything went wrong immediately. Uncle Kenji was at the museum, having somehow learned about the field trip. He positioned himself near the buses, watching for any suspicious activity. Yuki saw him and froze, her courage evaporating. Nothing like a stroke throwing a wrench into the whole claiming your niece schedule. Suddenly everyone's debating uncle eligibility like it's fantasy football draft season, while these girls are planning their great escapes one field trip at a time. Ms. Tanaka had to abort the extraction, maintaining her cover as just another museum visitor. We regrouped and tried again 2 weeks later. This time, my mother created a diversion, faking a medical emergency that required multiple family members to accompany her to the hospital. With the adults distracted, Yuki simply walked out the back door and met Ms. Tanaka at a nearby park. By the time the family realized the medical emergency was false, Yuki was already at a safe house. The family's response to losing Yuki was different. Instead of unified action, they turned on each other. My father blamed my mother. Uncle Kenji accused other family members of helping us. The younger generation began openly questioning why they were losing so many girls. Some uncles started fighting over the remaining claims, each worried their assigned girl would be next to escape. 5 months after my escape, I sat in a new safe house with Emi, Yuki, Hana, and 3 other girls who'd found their way to freedom. We were scattered across different locations for safety, but Ms. Tanaka had arranged this brief reunion. Looking at their faces, I saw the same mixture of trauma and hope I felt every day. Ms. Tanaka presented us with options. Some girls were pursuing education, getting their GEDs, and applying to colleges far from the family's reach. Others were learning trades, building new identities and careers the family would never think to check. A few were working with lawyers to secure official protection orders, though we all knew paper barriers meant little to determined uncles. I chose to train with Ms. Tanaka, learning how to identify girls in danger, how to build trust, how to plan extractions. It wasn't an easy path. Every rescue attempt risked exposure, capture, being dragged back to the life I'd escaped, but leaving other girls behind felt like abandoning pieces of myself. 6 months after my escape, the unthinkable happened. Uncle Kenji died. Not through violence or legal justice, but a simple car accident on an icy road. I felt nothing at first, then a confusing mix of relief and anger. He'd never face consequences for what he'd done, but he'd also never claim another girl. The wedding shoes in his trunk were found by police, who couldn't understand why a single man carried children's formal wear. His death created chaos in the family hierarchy. Without one of their strongest enforcers, other uncles began to worry about their own mortality, their own claims. Some tried to accelerate ceremonies, pushing for younger and younger girls to be committed before they could escape. Others began to distance themselves, perhaps finally understanding that their system was dying. My mother made her choice then. With Yuki safe and the family in disarray, she gathered important documents and left. Not dramatically, not with confrontation, but quietly during a family gathering. She drove to Ms. Tanaka's designated meeting point and never looked back. My father's rage was impotent without my mother to manage the household, without daughters to offer to his brothers. 7 months after my escape, we received word that made everything worthwhile. The youngest girls on my mother's list, including 2 infants, had been quietly removed from the family's reach. Their mothers, emboldened by our escapes and the family's weakness, had fled to relatives who'd rejected the claiming system. The next generation would grow up free from birth claims and grooming visits. The network had evolved beyond what Ms. Tanaka had originally built. Former victims became rescuers. Safe houses multiplied. Teachers, counselors, and social workers learned to recognize the signs. It wasn't perfect, and we couldn't save everyone, but every girl who escaped weakened the system further. 8 months after my escape, I helped coordinate my first extraction. A 13-year-old cousin whose ceremony was days away. Using everything I'd learned from Ms. Tanaka and my own experience, I helped her walk away from a family gathering in broad daylight. The family couldn't stop her without revealing their true nature to the outside world they'd hidden from for so long. The financial fraud case proceeded slowly, but steadily. While we couldn't rely on legal justice, the pressure it created was useful. Family members turned on each other, trying to shift blame and protect their assets. The unified front that had protected their secrets for generations crumbled into factions and infighting. Some uncles tried to adapt, claiming the escapes were a modern corruption that required returning to stricter traditions, but without the full family's support, their efforts failed. Young men in the family began refusing to participate in the claiming system, influenced by the outside world they'd been taught to fear. The cycle was breaking at multiple points. 9 months after my escape, I stood in a small apartment I shared with 2 other survivors. We supported each other through nightmares, through the guilt of leaving others behind, through the challenge of building normal lives. I had a job at a bookstore, was studying for my GED, and was learning what it meant to make choices for myself. Ms. Tanaka's network had helped extract 17 girls total, not all from my family, but from similar systems hidden in plain sight across the country. Each rescue was its own story of courage, careful planning, and the decision to believe a different life was possible. We couldn't publicize our victories, couldn't warn others openly, but word spread in whispers and careful messages. The family still existed, still clung to their traditions, but they were a shadow of what they'd been. No new babies had been claimed in months. Ceremonies were postponed indefinitely. Some branches of the family tree withered as members chose the outside world over the bloodline. Uncle Toshiro died alone, his wealth meaningless without new wives to exploit. 10 months after my escape, I got a message that made me cry for the first time in months. My youngest cousin, born after I'd fled, would never know the claiming system. Her parents had left the family entirely, choosing their daughter's freedom over generational wealth. She would grow grow up picking her own path, making her own choices, never knowing the weight of being owned from birth. The work continued. There were always more girls to help, more families hiding similar systems, more battles to fight, but each victory proved what the family had tried to deny. We were not property. We were not investments. We were people who deserved to choose our own lives. Ms. Tanaka retired from active extractions, her health affected by years of stress and constant vigilance. But she'd built something that would outlast her. A network of survivors who became rescuers, of safe houses that became homes, of whispered rebellions that became loud refusals. She'd saved dozens directly and inspired hundreds more to save themselves. I thought about Uncle Kenji sometimes, about those wedding shoes they'd found in his trunk, size 6 for feet that would never wear them. He'd been so certain I belonged to him, so confident in the system that had given him that certainty. He died never understanding that certainty was what we'd escaped from. My story wasn't unique. Every girl in the network had her own version, her own escape, her own uncles left behind wondering how their property had simply walked away. Some stories ended happily, others with compromise and continued struggle, but all of them ended with choice, the one thing the family had tried to steal from birth. Looking forward, I knew the fight wasn't over. Systems like ours existed in shadows everywhere, protected by wealth and tradition and the silence of shame. But we'd proven they could be broken. One girl at a time, one careful extraction after another, one whispered truth that spread like cracks in a foundation. The family had called it securing the bloodline. We called it something else, freedom. Subscribe for more content just like this. Hope you all enjoyed watching this video.